They say that in the vastness of space, no one can hear you scream. But what happens when the scream belongs to an innocent human child, and her father possesses the power to make entire star systems tremble? What happens when beings from another world mistake mercy for weakness and compassion for cowardice? Sarah Chen was just 16 years old when she stepped off the transport shuttle onto Kepler 442b, excited about her new life on the frontier colony. She had no idea that her simple act of showing kindness to a wounded alien would set in motion events that would reshape the balance of power across 3 galaxies. She didn't know that her father, the quiet maintenance engineer who taught her to see good in everyone, carried secrets darker than the void between stars. This is the story of what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object. When a father's love collides with an empire's arrogance. When the most dangerous weapon in human history discovers that his greatest weakness has been taken from him forever. Some mistakes can never be undone. Some sleeping giants should never be awakened. And some fathers will burn entire worlds to the ground for the memory of their daughter's smile. The Zephyrian Empire thought they were dealing with just another human settlement. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth, his weathered face creasing into a smile as he watched his daughter Sarah bound across the maintenance bay. At 16, she still moved with the boundless energy of childhood, her dark hair catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the colony's massive dome overhead. Kepler 442b wasn't Earth, but it was home now, and Sarah had adapted to their new life with the resilience that never ceased to amaze him. "Dad, you'll never guess what happened today," Sarah said, practically vibrating with excitement as she perched on his workbench, careful to avoid the delicate sensor arrays he'd been calibrating. Marcus set down his tools and gave her his full attention. This was their ritual. Had been since she was small enough to sit in his lap while he worked. No matter how exhausting his days were maintaining the colony's life support systems, no matter how many broken atmospheric processes or malfunctioning gravity generators demanded his attention, Sarah always came first. "Tell me everything," he said, settling back against his workbench. Sarah's eyes lit up. "There was this creature near the eastern perimeter. It was hurt, Dad. Really badly hurt. The other kids wanted to call security, but it wasn't threatening anyone. It was just lying there, bleeding this silver liquid that sparkled in the light." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. His daughter had inherited his late wife's compassionate heart, but here on the frontier, compassion could be dangerous. The Kepler system wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. Most of the indigenous species kept their distance from human settlements, and there were good reasons for that mutual avoidance. "What did you do?" he asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. "I helped it," Sarah said simply, as if there had never been any other option. It had these beautiful purple scales, and the most incredible eyes, like looking into deep space. When I got close, it didn't try to hurt me. It just looked so scared and alone. She pulled out her tablet and showed him a photo. The creature was indeed beautiful, roughly humanoid but distinctly alien, with elongated limbs and features that suggested both grace and intelligence. Its scales shimmered even in the still image, and Marcus could see the silvery blood Sarah had mentioned pooling beneath what appeared to be a significant wound in its side. "I used the first aid kit from school," Sarah continued. "Dr. Martinez taught us about treating different physiologies last month. The creature let me clean the wound and apply a universal healing gel. It didn't speak, but I could tell it understood I was trying to help." Marcus studied the image more carefully, his trained eye picking up details that Sarah might have missed. The creature's clothing, what little of it was visible, showed signs of advanced technology. The material seemed to shift and adapt to the wearer's movements, and there were what looked like integrated systems woven into the fabric itself. "Did it say anything? Make any sounds?" Marcus asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not at first. But when I was finished helping, it touched my hand and said something in a language I'd never heard before. It sounded like music, Dad. Like the wind chimes Mum used to hang on our porch back on Earth." The mention of Elena hit Marcus like it always did. A sharp pain that time had dulled but never eliminated. His wife had died in the transport accident that brought them to Kepler 442b, and sometimes he saw so much of her and Sarah that it took his breath away. "Then what happened?" he asked. "It stood up and walked away, but before it left, it looked back at me and did this thing with its hands." Sarah demonstrated, bringing her palms together and then opening them toward the sky. "I think it was saying thank you." Marcus nodded, but his mind was already racing. In his 42 years, 30 of them spent in places most people couldn't pronounce, He'd learned to read situations quickly. Sarah's encounter wasn't just a random meeting with injured wildlife. The creature's technology, its apparent intelligence, its calm reaction to human contact, all suggested something more significant. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," he said finally, because that was what Elena would have told her, and because it was true. "But next time something like this happens, maybe call me first? I worry about you out there alone." Sarah rolled her eyes with the practiced exasperation of a teenager. "Dad, I'm not alone. I was with my study group, remember? We were collecting atmospheric samples for our terraforming project." "Right, your study group." Marcus smiled. Sarah's friends were good kids, but they were still kids. They saw Kepler 442b as an adventure, a chance to be pioneers. They didn't understand that frontier life meant constant vigilance, that the difference between life and death often came down to split-second decisions and hard-earned experience. Not that Marcus had told Sarah about his own experience. As far as she knew, her father had always been a maintenance engineer, a quiet man who fixed things and kept the lights on. She didn't know about the other life he'd led before she was born, the things he'd done in the name of human survival, the reasons he'd chosen this remote assignment at the edge of known space.
"Are you working late again tonight?"
Sarah asked, glancing at the diagnostic equipment scattered across his workbench. Marcus looked at the atmospheric processor readings he'd been analyzing. The numbers were troubling, showing fluctuations that suggested either equipment failure or external interference. With the colony's population approaching 5,000, any disruption to their life support systems could be catastrophic. "Probably," he admitted. "We're seeing some irregularities in the Eastern Sector processes. Nothing dangerous yet, but I want to run a full diagnostic." "The Eastern Sector?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "That's where I found the creature today." The tightness in Marcus's chest intensified. Coincidences were rare on the frontier, and when they did occur, they usually meant trouble. "Sarah, I want you to promise me something," he said, turning to face her fully. "If you see that creature again, or any other unusual activity in the Eastern Sector, you'll contact me immediately." "Not security, not your teachers, me. Can you do that?" Something in his tone must have alerted her to his seriousness, because her playful demeanor shifted instantly. This was another thing she'd inherited from her mother, the ability to read people's emotions and respond accordingly. "Of course, Dad. Is everything okay?" Marcus forced himself to smile. "Everything's fine. I just like to be thorough, you know that." Sarah nodded and hopped down from the workbench. "I should let you get back to work. But Dad?" She paused at the doorway. "I'm glad I helped that creature today. It felt like the right thing to do." "It was the right thing to do," Marcus assured her. "Your mother would have been proud." After Sarah left, Marcus turned back to his diagnostic equipment, but his mind wasn't on atmospheric processes anymore. He activated a secure communication channel, one that hadn't been used in over 3 years, and sent a coded message to a contact he'd hoped never to need again. The response came back within minutes, faster than should have been possible given the distance to Earth. Marcus read it twice, his expression growing grimmer with each word. "Zephyrian scout ships detected in outer system. Diplomatic protocols initiated but no response received. Colony evacuation plans should be reviewed. Status report requested." Marcus deleted the message and stared out through the dome at the alien landscape beyond. Kepler 442b's twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that never quite looked right to human eyes. Somewhere out there, Sarah's wounded creature was probably finding its way home, carrying with it the memory of human kindness. Marcus hoped it would remember that kindness in the days to come. Because if the Zephyrians were already in system, Sarah's simple act of compassion might be the only thing standing between the colony and complete annihilation. He opened another secure channel, this one requiring biometric verification that scanned his retinas and analyzed his DNA. When the connection established, a familiar voice crackled through the speakers. "Marcus? Jesus, it's been 3 years? Please tell me you're calling to chat about old times." "I wish I were, Colonel, but we've got a situation developing out here, and I think it's about to get very complicated very quickly." "How complicated are we talking?" Marcus looked at the photo Sarah had shown him, studying the creature's technology and bearing. "The kind that requires a Reaper." There was a long pause. "Marcus, you know what calling yourself back to active duty means. You know what it costs." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "But Sarah is here, and she's all I have left." "Understood. How long do you need?" Marcus checked the atmospheric readings again. The fluctuations were increasing, And now he was certain they weren't caused by equipment failure. Something was interfering with their systems from the outside. Something with technology advanced enough to disrupt human engineering without triggering their security protocols. 48 hours, he said. Maybe less. You'll have whatever support we can provide. But Marcus? The nearest fleet is 6 months out. Whatever happens, you're on your own until then. I've been on my own before. Not with your daughter to protect. Marcus closed the channel and began pulling equipment from storage lockers that hadn't been opened since their arrival on Kepler 442b. Weapons and armor that Sarah had never seen, tools of a trade he'd tried to leave behind. As he worked, his movements took on a precision and efficiency that would have seemed impossible for a simple maintenance engineer. But Marcus Chen had never been simple, and he'd never really been just an engineer. For 15 years, he'd been humanity's most effective deep space operative, a ghost who moved through alien territories like a whisper of death. The Reaper program had created 47 enhanced soldiers, warriors whose very existence was classified beyond the highest levels of government. Only Marcus had survived long enough to retire. Outside, Kepler 442b's night cycle began, and the first stars became visible through the dome. Marcus finished his preparations and sealed everything back into its hiding places. Tomorrow he would continue playing the role of devoted father and dedicated engineer. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, the Reaper walked again. He made one final check of the colony's security systems, noting the positions of patrol units and the status of the perimeter sensors. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus knew that appearance could be deceiving. If the Zephyrians were already here, if they were using advanced reconnaissance to study the colony's defenses, then the first sign of trouble might also be the last. As he walked home through the quiet residential district, Marcus allowed himself to imagine that he was wrong, that Sarah's encounter was just a chance meeting with harmless wildlife, that the atmospheric anomalies were simply equipment malfunctions. But 30 years of survival had taught him to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. His house was dark except for the warm glow coming from Sarah's room, where she was probably reading or working on homework. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching the light beneath her door, and made a silent promise. Whatever came, whatever the cost, Sarah would survive, even if that meant the rest of the galaxy would have to learn why the Reaper program had been created in the first place, and why some sleeping giants should never be awakened. The night seemed peaceful, but Marcus knew that peace was often just the calm before the storm, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the colony's protective dome, forces were already in motion that would test everything he'd ever learned about war, sacrifice, and the lengths a father would go to protect his child. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Sarah was safe, and that was enough. For now, the morning alarm echoed through the colony dome at precisely 0600 hours, as it had every day for the past 3 years. Marcus was already awake, had been for 2 hours, monitoring communication channels and reviewing security feeds from his personal terminal. The night had passed quietly. Too quietly for his taste. In his experience, when dangerous predators went silent, it usually meant they were positioning themselves for an attack. Sarah bounded into the kitchen with her usual morning energy, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her tablet clutched in the other hand. She moved with the unconscious confidence of youth, completely unaware that her father had spent the night mentally calculating escape routes and weapons caches. "Morning, Dad," she said, grabbing a nutrition bar and a juice packet from the dispenser. "Doctor, Martinez wants us to return to the eastern sector today to collect follow-up samples. Apparently, our atmospheric readings from yesterday showed some interesting chemical variations." Marcus paused in his review of the overnight sensor logs. "Interesting how? Something about trace elements that shouldn't exist in this region. Metallic compounds that suggest underground mineral deposits or possibly..." Sarah consulted her tablet. "Or possibly evidence of advanced industrial processes." The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together in Marcus's mind, forming a picture he didn't like. The creature Sarah had helped, the atmospheric anomalies, the Zephyrian scout ships detected at the system's edge, and now evidence of industrial activity in the same area where his daughter had made first contact with an unknown alien species. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your field trip today. Maybe it would be better if you stuck to the southern sectors for now. There's been some equipment instability in the eastern region." Sarah looked at him with the suspicious expression that teenagers reserved for overprotective parents. "Dad, you fixed all the atmospheric processes last week. Your maintenance report showed green across the board." Marcus had forgotten how observant his daughter could be. Sarah paid attention to details, another trait inherited from her mother. Elena had been a xenobiologist, trained to notice patterns and anomalies that others might miss. "Just being cautious," he said, knowing it sounded weak even as he said it. "Is this about the creature I helped yesterday?" "Because I checked with the wildlife database and there's no record of anything matching its description being dangerous to humans." "The wildlife database covers known species, sweetheart. This planet still has surprises for us." Sarah studied his face with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of Elena during one of her research phases. "Dad, you're acting strange." "Ever since yesterday, you've been different, more tense, more worried. What aren't you telling me?" Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of trusting his daughter with the truth, instead of explaining the real dangers they might be facing, he chose to maintain the fiction of their peaceful existence.
I'm just concerned about you spending so much time in unexplored areas.
"This is a big planet, and we've only been here 3 years. We don't know everything about it yet." Sarah's expression softened. "Dad, I know you worry about me. I know losing Mum made you protective. But I can't live my life afraid of every shadow. Mom wouldn't have wanted that." The mention of Elena hit its mark, as Sarah had known it would. Marcus felt the familiar ache of loss, coupled now with the fear of experiencing it again.
"You're right," he said finally. "Just promise me you'll be careful."
"And remember what we discussed yesterday about contacting me if anything unusual happens." Sarah kissed his cheek and headed for the door. "I promise, Dad. Love you. Love you too, sweetheart." After Sarah left, Marcus activated his secure communication array and sent coded updates to his contact at Colonial Command. The response came back within an hour, confirming his worst fears. Long-range sensors had detected 3 Zephyrian heavy cruisers entering the outer system during the night cycle. They were running silent, using advanced stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to standard detection equipment. The Zephyrians were a spacefaring empire that had first encountered humanity 12 years ago, during the early expansion period. Initial contact had gone poorly. The Zephyrians viewed humans as primitive and aggressive, while humans found the Zephyrians to be arrogant and condescending. Several border conflicts had escalated into full-scale warfare, and it was during those conflicts that the Reaper program had been born. Marcus had personally eliminated 14 Zephyrian command ships during the war, using tactics that had earned him a reputation as either humanity's greatest hero or its most efficient monster, depending on perspective. The official records listed him as killed in action during the final battle of the Centauri campaign. Only a handful of people knew that Marcus Chen had survived and been given a new identity as part of his retirement package. Now the Zephyrians were here, in a system that was supposed to be far from any strategic importance, approaching a colony that had no military defenses worth mentioning. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone or something had drawn them here. Marcus spent the morning reviewing the colony's defensive capabilities, such as they were. New Haven Colony had been designed as a research and agricultural settlement, not a military installation. Their security consisted of a handful of patrol units equipped with crowd control weapons, perimeter sensors designed to detect wildlife intrusions, and emergency protocols that assumed the biggest threat would be equipment failures or natural disasters. Against 3 Zephyrian heavy cruisers, the colony's defenses would last approximately 4 minutes. At midday, Marcus received the call he'd been dreading. "Dad?" Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system, tight with fear and excitement. "I think you need to get out here right away. Something's happening in the eastern sector, something big." Marcus was already moving, grabbing equipment from his emergency kit while keeping Sarah on the line. "Where are you exactly?" "About 2 kilometers east of Checkpoint 7. Dad, there are ships here. Alien ships. They just appeared out of nowhere, like they materialized from empty air." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. I want you to find cover immediately. Don't try to get closer to the ships. Don't try to make contact. Just hide and stay quiet until I get there." "Dad, it's okay. The ships aren't threatening anyone, and the creature I helped yesterday is here. I think it's trying to communicate with the people from the ships. Sarah, get away from there, now." "That's an order." There was a pause, and when Sarah spoke again, her voice carried a note Marcus had never heard before. "Dad, you're scaring me." "What's going on? What do you know about these ships?" Marcus was running now, using paths through the colony that would get him to the eastern sector fastest. Behind him, emergency alarms began to sound, as the automated systems detected the unauthorized atmospheric craft that Sarah had described. "I'll explain everything when I get there," he said. "Right now, I just need you to stay safe. Can you do that for me?" "I'm trying, but Dad..." Something's wrong. The ships are powering up their weapons systems. I can see energy signatures building on their hulls. Marcus pushed himself harder, calling on reserves of speed and endurance that most humans didn't possess. The Reaper enhancement program had changed him in fundamental ways, making him faster, stronger, and more resilient than baseline humanity. For 3 years, he'd kept those abilities carefully hidden. Sarah, move away from the ships immediately. Find the deepest cover you can and stay there. Dad, the creature is moving toward me. I think it's trying to warn me about something. It's making those musical sounds again, but they sound urgent now, almost panicked. The communication line filled with static, then cleared to reveal sounds that made Marcus's heart stop. Energy weapons powering up. The distinctive whine of Zephyrian plasma cannons reaching full charge. Sarah, respond. Dad, they're aiming at the colony. The ships are turning their weapons toward New Haven. I have to warn everyone. Sarah, no! Stay where you are! But the line had gone dead. Marcus reached the eastern perimeter in record time, moving faster than any normal human could manage. What he saw, when he crested the ridge overlooking the contact site, made him understand that everything he'd tried to leave behind was about to return with a vengeance. 3 sleek Zephyrian vessels hung motionless in the air, their hull configurations identifying them as reconnaissance cruisers rather than the heavy battleships his intelligence contacts had reported. These were smaller, more agile craft, designed for stealth operations and surgical strikes. The kind of ships that were sent to eliminate targets quietly and efficiently. Below the ships, Marcus could see figures moving, Zephyrian soldiers in their distinctive powered armor, and in the center of their formation 2 smaller figures. One was clearly the creature Sarah had described, its purple scales, now visible in full sunlight. The other figure made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Sarah was standing in the open, her hands raised in what she probably thought was a universal gesture of peace. She was talking to the Zephyrian commander, her voice carrying across the distance though Marcus couldn't make out the words. Marcus activated his enhanced vision, using cybernetic implants that had been installed during his military service. The zoom function let him see Sarah's face clearly, see the expression of wonder and curiosity as she attempted first contact with an alien species. She had no idea she was talking to her own executioners. The Zephyrian commander was listening to Sarah with what appeared to be polite attention, but Marcus could read the alien's body language. The slight tilt of the head, the positioning of the arms, the way the other soldiers had formed a containment pattern around the conversation area. They weren't here for diplomacy. Marcus began moving toward the contact site, staying low and using terrain features to mask his approach. As he moved, he activated systems that had been dormant for 3 years, feeling cybernetic enhancements come online throughout his body. Enhanced reflexes, improved sensory processing, tactical analysis subroutines, all the modifications that had made him one of humanity's most effective weapons. Through his enhanced hearing, he caught fragments of the conversation below. Sarah was explaining human colonial policies, talking about peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. The Zephyrian commander was asking questions about the colony's population, its defenses, its strategic resources. Marcus was close enough now to see the weapon signatures on the Zephyrian soldiers. Plasma rifles capable of cutting through reinforced armor, energy shields that could deflect most human weapons, communications equipment that would let them coordinate with the heavy cruisers still hidden in the outer system. But what made Marcus's blood run cold was the expression on the Zephyrian commander's face. The alien was smiling, showing rows of sharp teeth in what Marcus recognized as anticipation. The Zephyrians weren't here to negotiate or establish diplomatic relations. They were here to test human responses to a surprise attack. Sarah's compassionate first aid to their wounded scout had given them everything they needed to plan a perfect ambush. As Marcus watched, the Zephyrian commander raised one hand, and the soldiers around Sarah shifted position slightly. It was a subtle movement, but Marcus recognized it from military briefings. They were preparing to open fire. Sarah was still talking, still believing in the possibility of peaceful contact between species.
She was explaining how the colony's agricultural research could benefit both races, how human terraforming technology might help the Zephyrians establish their own settlements. The Zephyrian commander nodded politely and drew his sidearm.
Marcus had perhaps 3 seconds to cover the remaining distance between his position and his daughter. 3 seconds to reveal everything he'd tried to hide, to become once again the weapon he'd hoped never to be. He made his choice. The first Zephyrian soldier died before anyone realized Marcus was there, his throat opened by a monomolecular blade that moved faster than the alien's enhanced reflexes could track. The second soldier managed to turn toward the threat before Marcus's second blade found the gap in his armor at the base of his skull. By the time the Zephyrian commander registered what was happening, Marcus was already moving towards Sarah, his body moving with the lethal grace that had once made him the most feared human in known space. "Sarah, get down!" Sarah turned at the sound of his voice, her face showing confusion and fear as she saw her father emerge from cover like something out of a nightmare, weapons in both hands and moving with impossible speed. The Zephyrian commander fired first, his plasma bolt passing through the space where Marcus had been a microsecond earlier. Marcus's return fire was more accurate, the energy blast punching through the alien's torso armor and dropping him instantly. The remaining Zephyrian soldiers were opening fire now, their weapons lighting up the afternoon air with deadly energy. Marcus moved between Sarah and the attackers, his personal shields absorbing the initial barrage while he calculated angles and timing. "Dad, what's happening? How are you doing this?" Marcus couldn't answer. All his attention was focused on keeping Sarah alive while eliminating the immediate threats. His tactical systems were running combat algorithms, identifying weak points in enemy armor, calculating trajectory paths, predicting movement patterns. He was no longer Marcus Chen, maintenance engineer and devoted father. He was Reaper 7 and the hunt had begun. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, 12 Zephyrian soldiers lay dead around the contact site, their advanced armor no match for weapons and tactics they had never encountered before. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, his breathing steady and controlled, his enhanced physiology already processing the combat drugs that had flooded his system during the fight. Sarah crouched behind the cover where Marcus had pushed her, her face pale with shock and disbelief. She stared at her father as if seeing him for the first time, which in many ways she was. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "What just happened? How did you do those things?" Marcus deactivated his weapons and walked toward her, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. He could see the fear in her eyes, fear of him, and it cut deeper than any enemy weapon ever had. "Sarah, I know this is confusing. I know I have a lot of explaining to do. But right now, we need to get back to the colony. Those ships are going to be looking for their ground team, and when they don't report back, they're going to assume the worst." Sarah stood up on unsteady legs, her eyes never leaving his face. "Those moves you made, that speed, those weapons. Dad, normal people can't do things like that." "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "Normal people can't." Before Sarah could ask more questions, the air around them began to shimmer. The Zephyrian reconnaissance ships were powering up their main weapons, preparing to level the area where their ground team had gone silent. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the colony. "We have to run, now." They made it halfway back to the colony perimeter before the first plasma bombardment hit the contact site. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the air filled with the smell of superheated earth and vaporized rock. Behind them, a section of the eastern sector that had been rolling grassland moments before was now a smoking crater. "They're trying to kill us," Sarah said, her voice filled with the kind of disbelief that came from having your worldview shattered in the span of minutes. "Yes," Marcus said simply, "they are." The colony's emergency sirens were wailing now, their urgent tones echoing across the dome. Citizens were streaming toward the shelter areas, following evacuation procedures they'd hoped never to use. The sight of panicked families running for safety made Marcus's jaw clench with anger. These people had come to Kepler 442b, looking for a better life, a chance to build something positive in the vastness of space. They were farmers, researchers, teachers, children. They had no connection to the wars that had shaped Marcus's life, no part in the conflicts that had brought the Zephyrians here. But the aliens didn't care about innocence. In their culture, weakness was a crime, and compassion was weakness. The fact that humans had established a peaceful colony on what they considered their territory was seen as an insult that demanded violent correction. Marcus and Sarah reached the colony's main administrative building just as the second wave of orbital bombardment began. This time, the Zephyrians weren't targeting the contact site. They were systematically destroying the colony's infrastructure, starting with the power generation stations and moving toward the residential areas. "Director Santos!" Marcus called out as he spotted the colony administrator coordinating the evacuation efforts. Santos turned, his face showing relief at seeing them alive. "Marcus, thank God. We received reports of weapons fire in the eastern sector, and then the bombardment started. What's the situation out there?" Marcus glanced at Sarah, who was listening intently to every word. There was no way to sugarcoat what was coming. The situation is that we're under attack by a technologically superior alien force, and our evacuation procedures aren't going to save us. How long until everyone reaches the shelters? Another 20 minutes, maybe 30 if we have stragglers. But Marcus, the shelters are designed for environmental emergencies, not military attacks. They won't withstand a sustained bombardment. Marcus was already running tactical calculations. The colony's shelter system was built into the bedrock beneath the main dome, designed to protect the population from asteroid impacts or atmospheric storms. The shelters might survive a few hits from orbital weapons, but the Zephyrians would simply keep firing until they broke through. We need to evacuate off-world, Marcus said. How many transport ships do we have operational? 6 cargo haulers and 2 passenger transports. But Marcus, they're not equipped for emergency evacuation. We could maybe fit 800 people between all of them, and that's assuming we strip out all non-essential equipment. Sarah spoke up for the first time since they'd reached the colony. There are almost 5,000 people here. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Even if they could somehow get the transport ships loaded and launched without being destroyed by the Zephyrian cruisers, they could save less than 20% of the colony's population. Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, a familiar sensation he remembered from his military days. It was the moment when you realized that victory was impossible, when the only choice left was deciding how much of the enemy you could hurt before they killed you. Director Santos, I need you to continue the evacuation as planned. Get as many people into the shelters as you can. But I also need you to send a coded transmission to Colonial Command. Tell them that Reaper 7 is activating Protocol Black. Santos stared at him blankly. Reaper 7? Marcus, what are you talking about? But Sarah understood, or at least part of it. Dad, you were a soldier before we came here, before you became an engineer. That's how you could fight those aliens. Marcus nodded. I was a soldier, yes. A very specialized kind of soldier. Another bombardment shook the building around them, and through the windows Marcus could see fire spreading through the colony's outer districts. The Zephyrians were being methodical, destroying everything that made human life on Kepler 442b possible. Director, that transmission needs to go out immediately. Use emergency channels, full encryption, and market priority 1. Marcus, I don't understand what's happening here, but if you have some kind of military background that can help us, then please do whatever you can. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing Elena's face and her features, remembering all the peaceful evenings they'd shared in their simple home. Sarah, I need you to go with Director Santos to the command center. I want you to help coordinate the evacuation. What about you? I have work to do. Sarah stepped closer to him, her fear replaced by determination. Dad, I don't know what you used to be, but I know what you are now. You're my father, and you've spent 3 years protecting me. Let me help you protect everyone else. Marcus felt his heart breaking. This was exactly what Elena would have said in the same situation. The same courage, the same refusal to abandon others in need, the same willingness to face danger for the sake of doing what was right. Sarah, what I have to do now, the things I'm going to have to become, you shouldn't see that. I've spent 3 years trying to be the father you deserved, trying to leave the other part of my life behind. But those aliens out there, they've made that impossible. Then don't leave it behind, Sarah said simply. Use it. Use whatever you have to use to save these people. Marcus looked around the command center, seeing the faces of colony personnel who were struggling to coordinate a defense against an enemy they couldn't comprehend. They were good people, brave people, but they were civilians.
They were wary.
They had no experience with warfare, no understanding of the kind of enemy they faced. Director Santos, I'm going to give you some instructions, and I need you to follow them exactly, without asking questions. First, pull everyone back from the outer perimeter. The Zephyrians are going to start landing ground forces soon, and our security teams can't stop them. Marcus, we can't just abandon half the colony. We're not abandoning them. We're consolidating our defenses around the shelter entrances. Make the aliens fight for every meter if they want to reach the civilian population. Marcus pulled up a holographic display of the colony's layout, his fingers moving across the interface with practiced efficiency. Second, I need you to reroute all available power to the defensive grid. I know we don't have military-grade weapons, but we do have industrial equipment that can be repurposed. Sarah watched her father transform the colony's emergency management system into something resembling a military command center. His movements were confident and precise, showing a familiarity with tactical planning that couldn't have been learned in an engineering classroom. Third, and this is critical, I need access to the Colonial Authority override codes, all of them. Director Santos hesitated. Marcus, those codes control everything. Life support, transportation, communications, even the industrial fabrication systems. What are you planning to do? Marcus met his eyes steadily. I'm planning to remind the Zephyrian Empire why they used to fear humans. And I'm planning to make them pay for every single life they take here. The building shook again, this time from a different kind of explosion. Through the windows they could see atmospheric craft descending through the colony's protective dome. Sleek, predatory shapes that moved with alien grace as they sought landing sites. The ground invasion has begun, Marcus said calmly. Director, you have 5 minutes to get those override codes and then get to the shelter command post. Sarah, I need you to go with him.
Kyrie, real?
Dad, no. I'm not leaving you. Marcus knelt down so he could look directly into his daughter's eyes. Sarah, I love you more than anything in this universe. That's exactly why I need you somewhere safe while I do this. Because what comes next, it's going to change everything. The man who comes back from this fight might not be the same person who raised you. You'll always be my father, Sarah said fiercely, no matter what you have to do. Marcus pulled her into a hug, memorizing the feeling of her arms around him, the sound of her breathing, the way she smelled like the jasmine flowers she'd planted in their garden. If these were their last moments together, he wanted to remember every detail. I promise you, he whispered, that as long as I'm alive, those aliens will not hurt you or anyone else in this colony. That's a promise from your father and from the soldier I used to be. Sarah pulled back and looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her 16 years. Then go keep your promise. Marcus kissed her forehead and stood up, his expression already shifting from loving parent to something altogether more dangerous. Director, those codes, now. As Santos began entering his authorization sequences, Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the descending alien craft. In his mind, he was already calculating approach vectors, estimating troop strength, identifying priority targets. Somewhere in the depths of his enhanced nervous system, dormant combat protocols were coming online. Tactical analysis subroutines began processing environmental data. Weapon systems that had been locked down for 3 years started their activation sequences. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their intelligence assessment. They had observed the colony for weeks, studying its defenses and population. They had seen a peaceful settlement of farmers and researchers, protected by nothing more than crowd control weapons and emergency procedures. They had no idea that sleeping in the maintenance chief's quarters was a weapon that had once been considered too dangerous for conventional warfare. They didn't know that Marcus Chen had been responsible for more Zephyrian military casualties than any other single human in recorded history. They were about to learn. As the first alien landing craft touched down in the colony's central plaza, Marcus Chen began the transformation back into Reaper 7. And for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to be the most dangerous human being alive. The transformation began in the colony's maintenance tunnels, deep beneath the administrative buildings where Marcus had spent 3 years fixing atmospheric processes and calibrating life support systems. Now those same tunnels served as his staging area for the kind of operation he'd sworn never to conduct again. Marcus moved through the darkness with the fluid grace of a predator, his enhanced vision turning the pitch-black service corridors into a detailed tactical environment. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to minimize noise and maximize efficiency. Behind him, he left a trail of modified equipment and jury-rigged weapons that would have impressed his old military instructors. The colonial override codes had given him access to systems that the Zephyrians couldn't have anticipated. Industrial fabrication units were now producing ammunition and explosives. Environmental control systems had been weaponized, capable of creating localized atmospheric hazards. Even the simple maintenance robots had been reprogrammed with new directives. Through his enhanced hearing, Marcus tracked the movement of alien forces above. The Zephyrians had landed 4 full assault teams, roughly 200 soldiers equipped with advanced armor and energy weapons. They were moving through the colony with methodical precision, clearing buildings sector by sector and driving the human population toward the central shelter areas. It was a textbook occupation strategy, designed to minimize resistance and maximize psychological impact. The aliens wanted the colonists to feel helpless, to understand that their peaceful existence had been shattered forever. Marcus intended to teach them a different lesson entirely. His first target was Alpha Team, the northern assault group that was moving toward the residential district where many families were still trapped. Marcus had monitored their communications, learning their movement patterns and tactical preferences. The Zephyrians were efficient but predictable, following standard military protocols that Marcus had studied extensively during the war years. He positioned himself in the maintenance access tunnel beneath Building 7, a residential complex where 12 families had barricaded themselves on the upper floors. The Zephyrian assault team was moving toward the building's main entrance, their confidence evident in their casual formation and relaxed weapon postures. Marcus activated the first of his modifications. The building's environmental systems, normally used to maintain comfortable temperature and humidity levels, began releasing a colorless, odorless gas that would interfere with the aliens' enhanced sensory equipment. Their armor systems would compensate, but the compensation process would create a brief window of vulnerability. As the lead Zephyrian soldier reached for the building's main door, Marcus struck. The explosion that ripped through the building's foundation wasn't visible from the outside, but the effects were immediate and devastating. The carefully placed charges that Marcus had installed in the building's support structure created a controlled collapse that buried the alien assault team under tons of reinforced concrete and twisted metal. The psychological impact was even more significant than the tactical one. The Zephyrian forces had expected to face panicked civilians and perhaps a few security guards with primitive weapons. They hadn't anticipated an enemy who could turn the colony's infrastructure itself into a weapon. Marcus was already moving toward his second target before the dust from the first attack had settled. Bravo team was advancing on the agricultural processing center, where several dozen colonists were trapped in the storage facilities. Unlike the residential building, this target required a more direct approach. Marcus emerged from the service tunnels 50 meters behind the alien formation, his personal stealth systems rendering him effectively invisible to their sensors. In his hands, he carried weapons that had been designed specifically for fighting Zephyrian forces, energy rifles that fired rounds capable of penetrating their advanced armor. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it was over, another 20 Zephyrian soldiers were dead, and Marcus had vanished back into the tunnel system like a ghost. But the aliens were learning. The commander of the orbital vessels had been monitoring the ground operation, and the sudden loss of 2 full assault teams triggered a change in tactics. Instead of continuing with the methodical occupation plan, the Zephyrians began systematic bombardment of any structure that could conceivably hide human resistance fighters. Buildings that had housed Marcus's neighbors for 3 years were reduced to rubble in seconds. Parks where Sarah had played with her friends became smoking craters. The school where she studied xenobiology was vaporized by a direct hit from orbit. Marcus felt each destruction like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain focused. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when hundreds of lives depended on his tactical decisions. He made contact with Director Santos through the emergency communication system, his voice calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around them. "Director, what's the status on the civilian evacuation?" "Marcus, thank God you're alive. We've got about 3,000 people in the primary shelters, but the aliens are bombing everything above ground. How long can the shelters hold out?" Marcus checked his tactical displays, analyzing the bombardment patterns and calculating structural stress loads. The main shelter complex should withstand orbital bombardment for another 6 hours, maybe 8 if they don't switch to bunker buster munitions. "What about the transport ships?" "We managed to get 2 cargo haulers loaded and launched before the bombardment started. That's 400 people evacuated, but the aliens shot down our 3rd ship during takeoff. The remaining transports are trapped on the landing pads." Marcus absorbed this information while simultaneously planning his next series of attacks. The Zephyrians had made a tactical error by consolidating their remaining forces around the landing zone. They were protecting their evacuation route, but in doing so, they had created a target-rich environment. "Director, I need you to prepare the remaining transport ships for emergency launch. Strip out everything non-essential. Pack them as tight as safety allows." "Marcus, the aliens will just shoot them down like they did the others." "Not if they're too busy dealing with other problems. Give me 20 minutes, then launch everything you have." Marcus closed the communication channel and began the most dangerous phase of his operation. Instead of hiding in the tunnel system and conducting hit-and-run attacks, he was going to assault the alien landing zone directly. It was the kind of frontal attack that military doctrine considered suicidal, the sort of operation that required either overwhelming force or a complete disregard for personal survival. Marcus had neither, but he did have something the Zephyrians weren't expecting: the enhanced capabilities of a Reaper operative and a father's desperate determination to save his daughter. He emerged from the maintenance tunnels in the industrial district, using the massive fabrication plants as cover while he observed the alien landing zone. The Zephyrians had established a secure perimeter around their ships, with overlapping fields of fire and sensor coverage that would detect any conventional assault. But Marcus wasn't planning a conventional assault. The industrial district housed the colony's main power generation station, a fusion reactor that provided energy for the entire settlement. It also housed the primary atmospheric processing plant, the water reclamation facility, and the central computer core that controlled the colony's automated systems, all of which were about to become weapons in the hands of someone who understood how to turn civilian infrastructure into instruments of war. Marcus began by overloading the atmospheric processing plant's main compressors, creating a massive pressure buildup that he could release at precisely the right moment. Then he rerouted power from the fusion reactor through the industrial fabrication systems, turning the massive 3D printers into electromagnetic pulse generators. The water reclamation facility became a chemical weapons plant, as Marcus used its processing systems to create clouds of industrial solvents that would interfere with Zephyrian sensor equipment. The central computer core, normally used to coordinate colony operations, became a command and control system for the most complex military operation ever attempted by a single human being. When Marcus triggered his assault, it wasn't an attack in any conventional sense. It was a symphony of destruction orchestrated by a master tactician who had turned an entire colony into his weapon. The atmospheric pressure release created a localized hurricane that sent the lighter Zephyrian aircraft tumbling out of control. The electromagnetic pulse disabled their communications and targeting systems. The chemical clouds reduced visibility to near zero and contaminated their air filtration systems. And in the chaos, Marcus moved like the hand of death itself. He had become Reaper 7 again, the enhanced soldier who had once been considered humanity's most effective weapon. Every movement was precise, every shot was lethal, every tactical decision was calculated for maximum effectiveness. The Zephyrians died without understanding what was killing them. Their advanced technology and superior numbers meant nothing against an enemy who fought without regard for his own survival and who turned their every advantage against them. When the 20 minutes were up, the alien landing zone was a battlefield graveyard. The surviving transport ships launched through skies cleared of enemy aircraft, carrying another 1,000 colonists to safety. But Marcus knew that his victory was temporary. The orbital vessels would call for reinforcements, and eventually the Zephyrians would return with enough force to overwhelm even his enhanced capabilities. He had bought time for the evacuation, but he hadn't won the war. As he made his way back toward the shelter complex to check on Sarah, Marcus received a communication that changed everything. The message was brief, encoded in protocols that only a handful of people in the galaxy would recognize. Reaper 7, this is Reaper Command. We have been monitoring your situation. Reinforcements are en route. ETA 4 hours. Hold position and await support. Marcus stared at the message display, unable to believe what he was reading. The Reaper program had been officially disbanded 3 years ago. Its operatives retired or reassigned to conventional military units. But someone, somewhere, had been watching. Someone had decided that the situation on Kepler 442b was significant enough to reactivate humanity's most classified military asset. As Marcus headed toward the tunnels that would take him back to Sarah, he wondered who had made that decision and what it might cost. Because in his experience, when the Reapers were called back into service, it meant that the galaxy was about to become a much more dangerous place. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The reinforcements arrived exactly 4 hours after Marcus had received the coded transmission, emerging from hyperspace with the kind of precision that spoke of military planning at the highest levels. 3 ships materialized in the outer system, their configurations immediately recognizable to anyone who had served during the Zephyrian Wars. The lead vessel was the UES Nemesis, a Reaper-class heavy cruiser designed specifically for deep space operations against technologically superior enemies. Its sister ships, the Fury and the Vengeance, flanked it in a formation that had once struck terror into alien fleets across the galaxy. Marcus received their communication from his position in the Shelter Command Center, where he'd spent the past 4 hours coordinating the evacuation efforts and monitoring Zephyrian fleet movements. Sarah sat beside him, having refused every suggestion that she should rest or move to a more secure location. Reaper 7, this is Admiral Catherine Morrison, aboard the Nemesis. It's good to know you're still alive, Marcus. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions at hearing that voice. Admiral Morrison had been his commanding officer during the final year of the Zephyrian Wars, one of the few people who had known about his retirement and relocation to Kepler 442b. She was also one of the architects of the Reaper program, a brilliant tactician who had helped design the Enhanced Soldier Project. Admiral Morrison, Marcus replied, noting how Sarah's eyes widened at hearing him addressed by his real rank. I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought the program was officially disbanded. Officially, yes. Unofficially, we've been monitoring situations that might require specialized intervention. When our intelligence networks detected Zephyrian fleet movements toward a supposedly uninhabited system, we started paying attention. When we learned that system happened to contain one of our retired operatives and his family, we decided it was time to come out of retirement ourselves. Through the shelter's sensor array, Marcus watched the arrival of the human fleet register on Zephyrian instruments. The alien vessels, which had been maintaining orbital bombardment positions around Kepler 442b, immediately shifted into defensive formations. The 3 heavy cruisers that Marcus's intelligence contacts had warned him about became visible as they dropped their stealth systems and prepared for combat. Admiral, what's the tactical situation from your perspective? 3 Zephyrian heavy cruisers, roughly equivalent to our own firepower if we engage them directly. But we didn't come here to fight fair, Marcus. We came here to send a message. Sarah looked at her father with growing understanding. Dad, these are your people, your old unit. Marcus nodded. Admiral Morrison commanded the Reaper program during the war. She's the one who decided I was ready for retirement. And I'm the one who's decided you're ready to come back, Morrison said over the communication channel. Marcus, the situation in this sector has deteriorated since your retirement. The Zephyrians have been testing human colony defenses, probing for weaknesses. What happened here today wasn't random. It was a planned assessment of our response capabilities. Marcus absorbed this information while simultaneously monitoring the tactical displays. The human and Zephyrian fleets were maneuvering for position, neither side wanting to fire the first shot, but both preparing for inevitable combat. Admiral, there are still over 2,000 civilians in the shelter complex. Any orbital engagement is going to put them at risk. Which is why we're not going to conduct an orbital engagement, at least not in the traditional sense. Marcus, I need you to do something for us. Something that only a Reaper operative on the ground can accomplish. Marcus already suspected what she was going to ask, and he didn't like the implications. What kind of something? The Zephyrian fleet commander is aboard the lead cruiser, a vessel called the Eternal Dominion. His name is War Leader Kazith, and he's the architect of their new colonial suppression strategy. Intelligence suggests that he's been personally overseeing attacks on human settlements across the frontier.
Sarah leaned closer to the communication console.
What does that mean? Admiral Morrison's voice became grimmer. It means that War Leader Kazith has been responsible for the deaths of thousands of human civilians. And it means that if we can eliminate him, we can send a message to the Zephyrian Empire that attacks on human colonies will have consequences. Marcus understood immediately. You want me to board their ship? The Nemesis carries a full complement of Reaper equipment, including personal stealth systems and boarding pods. You would launch during the opening phase of our engagement, when their attention is focused on the fleet action. By the time they realize what's happening, you'll already be inside their ship. It was exactly the kind of operation that Marcus had conducted dozens of times during the war, the kind of mission that had earned him his reputation as humanity's most effective deep space operative. Single operative infiltration of enemy vessels, elimination of high-value targets, extraction under fire. It was also exactly the kind of operation that had a mortality rate approaching 90%. Dad, no. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. You can't do this. You promised me you'd come back from the fight. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing Elena's courage and determination in her face. Sarah, if I don't do this, the Zephyrians will simply return with more ships. They'll keep attacking human colonies until someone stops them. Then let someone else stop them. Let the fleet handle it. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the speakers again. I'm afraid it's not that simple. The Zephyrian fleet has numerical superiority in this system, and they have reinforcements en route. If we engage them in conventional fleet combat, we might win, but the cost would be significant. And even if we destroy these ships, it won't prevent future attacks on other colonies. Marcus was already running tactical calculations, analyzing the proposed boarding operation from every angle. The risks were enormous, but the strategic benefits were equally significant. If he could eliminate War Leader Kazith and capture intelligence about Zephyrian colonial operations, it might save thousands of human lives, but it would also mean leaving Sarah, possibly forever. Marcus, Admiral Morrison continued, I won't order you to do this. You're officially retired, and you have every right to stay with your daughter and help coordinate the civilian evacuation. But you're also the only person in this system with the skills and equipment necessary to pull off this kind of operation. Sarah stood up and walked to the shelter's observation window, looking up at the alien vessels that hung in orbit like predatory birds. When she spoke, her voice carried a maturity that reminded Marcus painfully of her mother. How many people will die if you don't do this? Marcus joined her at the window. I don't know. Maybe thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. And how many people will you save if you do it? I don't know that either. But it might prevent attacks like this one from happening to other colonies. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her working through the moral calculation that had defined his entire adult life. The balance between personal desires and greater responsibilities, between the safety of those you love and the safety of those you'll never meet. Mum would have wanted you to save them, Sarah said finally. She always said that the worst thing about being human was knowing that you could help people and choosing not to. Marcus felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. Sarah, if I do this, there's a good chance I won't come back. The odds on this kind of operation are better than the odds of those families on other colonies if you don't try. Sarah turned to face him, and Marcus saw that she was crying. Dad, I've watched you for 16 years. I've seen how you fix things that are broken, how you solve problems that seem impossible. This is just another problem that needs solving. Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tightly while he made the hardest decision of his life. Admiral Morrison, this is Reaper 7. I'm accepting the mission. Understood. We'll have a boarding pod ready for launch in 30 minutes. Marcus, it's been an honor serving with you. The next 30 minutes were the longest and shortest of Marcus's life. He spent them with Sarah, walking through the shelter complex and talking to the colonists who had survived the attack. Families who had lost their homes but not their hope. Children who were scared but still believed that tomorrow would be better than today. These were the people he was fighting for. Not just Sarah, but all of them. Every human being who had chosen to make a life among the stars, who had dared to believe that the galaxy was big enough for compassion and kindness. When it was time to go, Sarah walked with him to the shelter's emergency exit, where a transport would take him to the rendezvous point with the Nemesis. They stood together in the airlock, neither wanting to say goodbye. Promise me something, Sarah said. Anything. Promise me that when this is over, when you've saved everyone you can save, you'll come home. Promise me that you'll remember you're not just a weapon, you're my father. Marcus kissed her forehead, memorizing the feel of her skin, the sound of her breathing. I promise. And, Sarah, I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me that if I don't make it back, you'll live your life. All of it. The good parts and the bad parts. The easy days and the hard ones. Promise me you'll be everything your mother and I hoped you could be. Dad, promise me. Sarah wiped her eyes and stood up straight. I promise. But you're coming back, so it won't matter. Marcus stepped into the transport, and the airlock sealed behind him. As the small craft lifted off and headed toward the waiting fleet, he allowed himself one last look at the colony, where he'd spent the happiest years of his life. Then he turned his attention to the tactical displays and began preparing for the most important mission of his career. Above them, the Zephyrian war leader Kazeth was about to learn why the human species had earned a reputation as the most dangerous opponents in known space, and why some sleeping giants should never be awakened. The boarding pod launched exactly on schedule, invisible to enemy sensors and guided by navigation systems that could thread a needle at 10,000 kilometers. Inside, Marcus Chen prepared to become Reaper 7-1 final time. The hunt was about to reach its conclusion, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the pod approached the Eternal Dominion, Marcus thought about Sarah's promise and his own. He would complete this mission, eliminate the threat to human colonies, and send the Zephyrian Empire a message they would never forget. And then, if the universe allowed it, he would go home to his daughter. The pod's hull began to glow as it penetrated the enemy ship's shields, and Marcus smiled grimly. War leader Kazeth was about to discover what happened when you threatened a Reaper's family. It was a lesson the Zephyrian Empire would remember for generations to come.